Robert Crumb is one of the most famous cartoonists in history. His comics challenged the way people viewed the medium itself. They were seedy, perverse, and grotesque, a far cry from what most came to expect from the industry. He was also influential to 60s counterculture as a whole. This comic, Keep On Trucking, was widely merchandised without his permission. He came to resent it, frequently taking legal action.
Headaches for 10 years after I drew it. Lawsuits and IRS problems.
His other most well-known creation was a bohemian named Fritz the Cat. Fritz was popular enough to get his own movie, which was a massive box office success despite being the first ever X-rated animated film. Similar to how Crumb paved the way for others in his medium, the film has been credited with paving the way for other animated works like South Park, Beavis and Butthead, and The Simpsons. However, an often lost nuance is that Crumb actually hated the film, and killed Fritz off at the height of his popularity, swearing off from ever using him again.
Tell my baby put the kitty gloves on and lace them tight. Whether you're hot man, you are not my father. The critic is not an analyst. If you recognize I represent the catalyst.
The story begins long before he was ever famous. When they were kids, Crumb and his siblings had an old tomcat named Fred. He drew comics about him to entertain his little brother and sister. The first is dated September 1959, when Crumb was 16. Cat Life has Fred as a real cat walking on all fours. He explores the night, fighting a rival gang over territory. Eventually, it all proves too much and he returns back home. Charles, his older brother, pushed him not to give up. He was similarly devoted to comics, which had inspired Robert in the first place. They collaborated a lot, crafting a world similar to Walt Kelly's Pogo strips. Fred the Cat became one of their anthropomorphic animals. The first Animal Town comic is dated March of 1960. In this story, Fritz is a traveling magician who just got chased out of town. Without a penny to his name, he begs a farmer for food. There isn't much consistency to Animal Town, veering from a retelling of Robin Hood to A Christmas Tale. That started to change near the end of 1961. Fritz helps a man with his failing marriage, with the plan including a double date. This story introduces both romance and a continuous ongoing plot. However, things took a dark turn as time went on. Charles's declining mental health took over his life, which reflected in his comics. This comic, with Fritz and Fuzzy the Rabbit, was one of their collaborations. Fritz denies becoming a symbol or idea. It slowly devolves to more and more text, losing all sight of even being a comic.
The writing takes over. Look at that. He's lost interest in drawing, and then he just went to this loony writing.
Eventually, Charles stopped drawing entirely, and Robert started writing solo works with Fritz as a star. The first solo story has Fritz about to meet a celebrity named Miss Della Pussywillow. He sneaks backstage, giving her flowers before professing his love. His efforts are completely ignored. He rants about this outside, connecting with another scorned fan, a female cat named Gabrielle. Fritz and Gabrielle's relationship quickly becomes the focus. They go on dates, and she introduces him to her dad. Fritz causes a huge mess with whipped cream and gets kicked out, but they continue dating in secret. The next story has Fritz looking for his old suitcase in a train station. It's populated by bugs. He drops a candle which sets the whole place on fire. The station explodes. Amidst the fallout, a news reporter interrogates him. Fritz confesses, turning him into a fugitive. He nearly runs over a crowd with a truck before sneaking off and reuniting with Gabrielle. They run away together and kiss before embracing the dawn of a new day. After graduating high school, he left home in 1962. He moved from Pennsylvania to Ohio, landing work at a greeting card company.
I'd abandoned my childhood dream of becoming a big-time professional cartoonist. By the time I was a senior in high school, I clearly discerned that the medium had become constricted, formalized, locked into a strict set of stifling commercial standards.
That changed as the 60s progressed. There was a new audience with different tastes and expectations. One such avenue was Help, a humor magazine edited by the creator of Mad. The magazine had a section where they'd publish work by amateur cartoonists. This is where he'd get his first comic strip published in 1965, which also meant the debut of Fritz the Cat. He brings a female cat home, strips off her clothes, and picks fleas off on top of her. It's pretty tame by today's standards, yet Mad's creators sent him a worrying letter.
We think that the little pussycat drawings you sent us were just great. Question is, how do we print them without going to jail?
Months later, Help published a second story, Fred the Teenage Girl Pigeon. Fritz is portrayed as a guitar-playing idol. He impresses the titular groupie, taking her home before eating her. These one-offs have a noticeably looser premise. It wasn't until the character was serialized in 1968 that he started to resemble the film. That year, Cavalier magazine started publishing Fritz Bugs Out. This cemented Fritz as both a hipster and a smooth-talking con artist. The story begins with Fritz venting to his friends about a breakup. He's still yearning for his ex named Winston. They invite girls over and Fritz meets a cat named Charlene. The two hit it off, bonding over being hopeless romantics. Fritz impresses her with vaguely coherent gibberish and they sleep together. When he goes back home, his roommates are studying for exams. They're completely unresponsive. This triggers a long rant about college where Fritz decides to drop out and live life to its fullest as a writer and poet. He impulsively sets all his notes and books on fire, burning down the entire building. Fritz is outcast for this and warned to evade police. This leads him to hide out at a bar where he meets a crow named Duke. There's a lot of questionable decisions about race in Crumb's work, but we're going to focus on this narrow case. The story uses crows to represent African Americans. Fritz tries to seem politically correct. He laments life is easier as a crow, then defends himself by stating he studied the race problem. Listen, this thing affects me very deeply, fella. As a cat, I have a considerable guilt complex because my kind have brought suffering on your kind. Despite this, they become friends and Duke saves his life after they crash a stolen car. The pair head to a party where Fritz smokes pot for the first time. He sleeps with a female crow, which inspires him to start a revolution. He climbs onto a car and rants about the perils of capitalism. The speech incites a riot, which he flees with the women. They hide out in his dorm room and he reunites with his ex-girlfriend, but more lovers keep showing up. When the cops arrive, his lovers fend them off so he can jump out a window. That night, Winston finds him hiding in a trash can. They argue before going on the run, which is where we learn more about their dynamic. Their car breaks down shortly after, causing Winston to berate him. Your naivety is astounding. You'd be completely lost without me, Fritz, and you know it. You'd be better off with one of those stupid morons like Charlene, who you could just sleep with and throw away when you're done. You can't cope with a mature woman. Fritz is sent off with a pail to the gas station. He abandons her only to realize he has no money. He hops trains, stopping at a big city. The comic ends with him being followed and beaten in an alleyway before returning home. Now, this isn't the only story adapted for the movie, but for the sake of clarity, I'm going to discuss the rest chronologically and clarify their relevance to the film. The next arc had Fritz as a special agent for the CIA. He goes undercover in China, inspired by the James Bond craze. Fritz discovers their plan to solve overpopulation by sending a bomb carrying 400 million Chinese citizens. He's swallowed by a giant fat chicken. The plan is foiled and Fritz scores. It should be apparent that Fritz doesn't have many consistent themes. While Bugs Out touches on broader social issues, it isn't always self-aware. After all, the character doesn't exist to serve a single narrative. If the story calls for it, he can be a hypnotist, an angry husband, a house cat, or a caricature of the outspoken yet hypocritical and out-of-touch leftist. This comic is where the intro to the movie comes from. They try to impress girls only to be ignored in favor of a crow. Fritz tricks him into leaving by claiming he knows someone that's selling drugs. Then he elicits sympathy so they'll sleep with him. The foursome get in the tub, have an orgy, it gets crowded, and the cops bust down the door. Fritz takes their gun and shoots the toilet. He escapes and becomes a fugitive.
Mother of God, I'm a fucking fugitive.
However, this story ends with him stealing some rich guy's clothes. The last of the three major arcs was Fritz the No Good. This comic has him join a guerrilla terrorist group in San Francisco. The story brings back Gabrielle, the mother of his child. The couple live in poverty, and she kicks Fritz out after he refuses to get a job. He runs into Hines, one of his old college roommates, who helps him reconnect with Winston. The two sleep together, but he finds himself completely aimless. That's when Fuzzy, his other dorm mate, shows up on a motorcycle. He invites Fritz to the revolution, taking him to a group plotting a terrorist attack. Fuzz starts viciously beating his girlfriend. They tie her to a chair, and Fritz rapes her. In 2011, Crumb withdrew from a festival in Australia after local outlets called him a sex pervert. They questioned if he was a cult genius or filthy weirdo. This made the artist uncomfortable enough that he decided to pull out.
It was strong stuff, and it made me look very, very bad. All it takes is a few people who overreact to something like that to show up and cause unpleasantness. I have a lot of anxiety about having to confront some angry sexual assault crisis group. I do these crazy cartoons. I have no defense. I just have to throw up my hands.
It's easy to dismiss critics as prudish or that they simply don't get the satire. It's harder to dismiss Memories Are Made of This, an autobiographical comic where he admits to rape. There's a tendency to whitewash these issues by defending it as some sort of social commentary. If you were to ask Crumb himself, he'd probably respond like he did in the 1994 documentary about his life.
I don't work in terms of conscious messages. I can't do that. It has to be something that I'm revealing to myself while I'm doing it, which means that while I'm doing it, I don't know exactly what it's about.
It's important to engage with it for what it is. Sometimes his comics were an outlet for his sexual obsession, and that's it. There isn't really a reason he made Fritz a rapist, but he is. The next day, they attempt to carry out their plan only to get busted. It turns out someone in their ranks was an informant. Fritz is visited by his wife in prison, who apologizes for everything she did. The story then cuts 2 months later, with Fritz out on the street once again. That's pretty much it for now, other than a page about drug abuse. Now that we've gone through the comics, we can look at the film. The plot begins with Fritz and his roommates trying to impress girls. In the comic, Fritz tricks the crow into leaving. In the film, the crow rejects the girls.
Black kids are so much groovier.
I went to a couple of Black Panther meetings.
I had no idea you people were so civilized.
I ain't no jive-ass black nigga, honey.
This is a huge change and immediately shows the film's independence from its source material. It was written and directed by Ralph Bakshi, a subversive artist in his own right. His perspective deeply affected the film, and to fully understand how, we have to understand his background. Ralph Bakshi was born in 1938 from a Jewish family. They emigrated to the United States and lived in poverty, surrounded by crime, prostitution, and racism. When he was 9, his family moved and he grew up as the only white kid in a black neighborhood. This is when the United States was still racially segregated. He even went to an all-black school, which was illegal without special permission. Police forcibly removed him from the premises, and his family moved back to eastern Brooklyn. Bakshi pursued a career in the arts, and after graduating, landed a job at the Terry Toons animation studio, quickly moving up the ladder from cell washer to inker to animator and finally director. He eventually quit to found his own studio in 1968. Bakshi was unhappy with the animation industry and felt the medium had much more potential. His first pitch was Heavy Traffic, a tale of inner-city street life. It wasn't picked up. This led him to Fritz the Cat, learning of the comic at a bookstore. He needed a property to get companies interested.
But I also knew that motion picture companies needed a property.
They arranged a meeting with Crumb, who seemed on board, but the cartoonist grew wary and refused to sign the deal. This led Bakshi to stay with him and his wife for a week in hopes of persuading him. It didn't work, but after Crumb left, his wife signed the contract anyway. Unsurprisingly, he had no involvement with production. As a result, the film has a unique identity from the comics and at times defines itself against them. That isn't to say it flat out ridicules his work. There are moments it sincerely pays tribute, even at times being a faithful adaptation. But the project quickly took on a life of its own. Bakshi sought to be the antithesis of Disney. It was the chance for something dirty, honest, and contemporary. He wanted it to feel real. He recorded documentary footage and incorporated it into the film. The dialogue, barring a few main characters, was largely recorded on the streets of New York.
Get the fuck off my car!
There is a lot of unscripted conversation. The film opens with 2 construction workers talking about their bourgeois daughters. They have issues with the 60s counterculture, which Fritz unknowingly epitomizes.
This ain't that. I'm living with some guy. You're living with some guy? What do you mean you're living with some guy? Well, this is the thing now. Free love.
This was a real recording, with each paid $50 to drink and talk with him for hours. The next scene has just one professional voice actor, Fritz himself. His friends were played by random kids at the park.
Yeah, high school punks.
Man, you know, those creeps are always here on weekends, man.
When Fritz becomes a fugitive, he hides out at a bar. Bakshi went to Harlem and recorded hours of conversations he had with black patrons. He asked specific questions for responses he could use in the film. There's a pretty interesting moment with this context. A recurring joke in the comic is his use of slang. Fritz and his roommates actively try to keep up. Spaced out? Yeah, spaced out. Uptight. Strung out. Hung up. Oh, okay. I'm hip. While at the bar, Duke teaches him the phrase, bug out. By God, man, I'm gonna bug out. This scene happens in the film, only Fritz is laughed at by the other patrons.
My God, man, I'm gonna bug out.
Did he say bug out, baby?
Go ahead, baby, bug out, bug out.
Ain't no bug out. What kind of shit is a bug out to him?
I know it is. It's some kind of damn.
This argues Crumb is out of touch, which is bad because that's the title of his comic. More seriously, it shows a gap in his perspective. His use of stereotypes, while satirical, often had the subtext of legitimate ignorance. It's no different here, and Bakshi's changes reflect that. Duke's character is much more fleshed out, even having his own visual motif. The riot in the film leads Duke to get shot and killed. Fritz doesn't mourn or acknowledge him at all. It's a strange detail, one that only makes sense if we're meant to be critical of him. The film knows he's selfish, hypocritical, and manipulative. Even Fritz's voice actor was chosen for sounding naturally phony.
The actor who played Fritz was always after girls. Fritz was full of shit, and I needed an actor who could be consistently full of shit.
The largest narrative shift is in the final act. After abandoning Winston, he meets a rabbit named Blue, who takes Fuzz's place in Fritz the No Good. Unlike the comics, Blue is an explicit Nazi, and his girlfriend's abuse is shown in a horrifying light. This time, instead of joining in, Fritz is the only one to object.
Cut it out! You're hurting her! Fucking maniac!
The terrorists knock him out, then convince him to bomb a power plant. He has a change of heart, but it's too late and he's caught in the explosion.
Far out.
That's how he was supposed to die, but Bakshi was forced to change the ending. The film is remarkable for its contempt of Fritz himself. It critiqued the very audience it was made for. Crumb may have hated hippies, but he hated this film a lot more.
Fritz the Cat. He's coming your way at this cinema.
By 1972, Crumb had been a celebrity for several years. The fame brought immense pressure, with many hoping he'd become a spokesman for their cause. He didn't engage, retreating from the public eye as his art became more twisted and upsetting. You can only imagine how upset he'd be to have his character commodified with someone else's views.
She loves, and when you get right down to it, I mean, that's where it's really at. The love you give is equal to the love you get.
Shortly after its release, he denied having any connection to the film. He strongly objected to its tone, calling it redneck and fascistic. He further criticized Bakshi for being unfunny and sexually repressed.
There's something real repressed about it. In a way, it's more twisted than my stuff. It's really twisted in some kind of weird, unfunny way. It's compulsive or something. It's like real repressed horniness. He's kind of letting it out compulsively.
Fritz the Cat was a financial hit, grossing over $90 million worldwide. It went on to become one of the most successful indie movies ever made. Crumb himself made $50,000 off the film's success. He retaliated months later with Fritz the Cat Superstar. Fritz moves to Hollywood following the success of his first film. He's dating a woman named Abigail who can fit him inside of her mouth. Fritz attends a meeting with Bakshi and his producer, who pitch Fritz Goes to India. He leaves to see a groupie where he rants about his success and mass media. He shows up on the Johnny Giraffe talk show. Yeah, I think these kids have some points worth considering about our society, Johnny. Some of their gripes are legitimate. Of course, a lot of what is called counterculture is just immature, sophomoric nonsense, but there's something to be said for the new lifestyles that are emerging nowadays. Speaking of which, you want to take a look at a clip from my latest movie? I think you'll appreciate the relevance of this scene to just what we're talking about. After the show, an ex named Andrea Ostrich begs him to sleep with her. Fritz can't get it up, so she sniffles and hides under a couch. He ignores her to watch himself on TV, feigning concern afterward. When this proves unsuccessful, he kicks her in the rear before calling her a foolish female. Andrea storms out and stabs him in the back of the head with an ice pick. Ha yourself, smartass. The only reason we know it's an ice pick is a box pointing to it, and there's another box pointing to his body with the text, "Violence in the Media." Fritz stayed dead after this, never appearing again in any of his comics. Crumb later said of the decision,
Fritz became nationally famous, and so finally, he had to be offed. In 1972, I felt compelled to have him killed. It was the only way I could resolve in my own mind what had become of him. He's definitely better off dead. Another casualty of the 60s.
A sequel to the original film premiered 2 years later titled The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. It was made without the involvement of Crumb or Bakshi. The story has Fritz married to Gabrielle, similar to his future in No Good.
No, he says have the baby. We'll get married. I'll take care of you.
He gets high and imagines himself in different lives. These stories are completely new from the original comics. The film made history with its R rating, though it only made $3 million. Bakshi became a celebrity after Fritz. He successfully produced Heavy Traffic and 8 other features over the next 11 years. His legacy is as a pioneer in both indie and adult animation. There's a lot I glossed over in viewing Fritz as a slice of their careers. Crumb is a difficult artist to discuss, even without the documentary from 1994.
He yelled at me for doing his pictures, but when push came to shove, he let someone bring a camera right into his bedroom where his brother was eating rope, where his mother was out of her mind. Would I do that to my family? Would I let the world see that? I have no respect for Crumb. Is he a good artist? Yes, if you want to do the same thing over and over. He should have been my best friend for what I did with Fritz the Cat. I drew a good picture and we both made out fine.
There's 2 perspectives to this story, and it's easy to understand where both are coming from. This struggle for respect turned into a battle of egos, one's commentary on another. There's nothing really quite like it, at least to the degree of these adaptations. Who knows, maybe it would have been better if they worked together. Whatever the case may be, that's the story of Fritz the Cat, a tale of 2 kitties, or whatever the fuck I'm gonna call this.